So you've been drawing for a while now, maybe a year, maybe much longer. But if you line up something that you drew recently next to something from like a year ago, they kind of look the same. All this work and no progress. Pretty discouraging, right? Because you're putting in the hours and you're not improving. So at some point, the thought creeps in maybe that you just don't have it, you know? Maybe art is just not for you. Well, I've taught thousands of students at this point, and I can tell you that it's almost never what's going on. So here are actually the 4 most likely reasons that your progress has been stalling and exactly how to reverse each one to start making crazy fast progress instead. So I'll go over when you learn something, where you learn it, what you're learning, and how often you should practice the whole system. So let's get into it. So the first one is when you learn something, and this is costing you more than you think probably, despite being exactly what you've been taught to do since childhood. Because in school, everything we learn is basically just in case we need it later. And as a result, we forget most of it, right? I don't remember much of what I learned in elementary school. And here's what learning just in case looks like. Maybe you decide that drawing hands is probably something that you should be working on. So you draw hours and hours just filling pages full of hands. You know, after a couple of ones, you feel like you're getting pretty good at this. Except maybe a couple of months later, you are drawing a character and then you get to the hands and suddenly all that practice I did, but it seems like nothing stuck. And that's not because you're bad at remembering. It's just because your brain had no reason to keep that information. When there's no problem to solve, like no context for anything, no immediate payoff, it quietly kind of gets discarded by your brain. So the alternative is something that's called just-in-time learning, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You learn what you need right when you need it. So instead of doing just lots of random studies, actually just start a drawing and then study whatever you need whenever you run into a problem. If you get to the character's face and you're struggling drawing the eyes, well, study that specifically just to solve the problem that's right in front of you, that's blocking you from continuing your drawing. That's just-in-time learning. So studies with no immediate purpose fade almost instantly. But studies that unlock something that you're stuck on tend to stay for good. They stick long term. And that's well-researched science. So stop stockpiling knowledge for some project that you might do someday. Instead, start the piece that's slightly too hard for you, run into problems, and learn your way out of them as you go. Now, if you've been around for a while, you've heard me talk about this one before a couple of months ago. So sorry for the repeat, but it's just too important to leave off of a list like this. And most people still aren't doing it. So that's when you learn. Now, number 2 is where the information is coming from. Because the quality of your reference decides basically the quality of what you learn. And most people never think about this at all. So here's the problem studying from other artists' drawing, which is what most people do. A drawing is already someone's interpretation, right? It's a pile of decisions that somebody else made. And unless you have a lot of experience yourself, you have really no way of knowing if those decisions were any good. They might look good to you, but to somebody more experienced, they might look like mistakes. So usually the problem is that a lot of artists out there, including ones that have huge followings, have real significant gaps in their fundamentals. But to an untrained eye, you know, the work might still look somewhat appealing, so it never occurs to question it, really. So if you like it and you want to draw, right, you copy it, mistakes included, and now those mistakes are sitting in your head as the way that things just are. You inherited somebody else's bad habits and you can't really see it because you've got nothing to check against. A photo can't do that to you. A photo of an arm isn't an interpretation, it's just an arm. It can't have wrong anatomy. So when you work off of real references, you're getting the information straight from the source, so to speak. And you're building your own understanding instead of borrowing conclusions from somebody else who might have gotten it wrong. And this all really comes down to observation, which is the skill sitting under everything else in art. Actually observing. Now, I'm not talking about just glancing at reference and, you know, grabbing shapes off of it. I'm talking about really observing, like how long that part is compared to this other part. Why does a particular muscle change shape right there? What's that other muscle? And to be clear, I would still study other artists too, right? I would just make sure that you include a lot of real references in your reference folders. Something that I know most people don't really do, and you should. Now this leads us to the third problem, what all of this is built on. And I know nobody wants to hear this one, but I'll just say it. You likely skipped the fundamentals, just like the vast majority of artists, and you're paying for it every time you're drawing. Fundamentals are fundamental to artists. That's deep. But I get why most people will just skip this stuff. Fundamentals kind of sound boring. Like nobody really gets excited about drawing boxes and cylinders. You get into art, you start drawing because you saw a cool drawing and you loved it, and now it makes you want to draw the same thing. So obviously most people just skip to the fun part, right? Without ever learning why it works or why it doesn't. And well, that's the actual problem. When you do that, you're not really drawing, you're imitating. Like a parrot, you know, repeating what it hears, but really doesn't understand what it's saying. And this is something I see constantly with students that have been drawing for a long time, but there's something in their drawing that just screams amateur. And it's always some obvious fundamental gap that they've been drawing around instead of properly learning. But here's maybe something that should encourage you. Fundamentals are by far the biggest gain available to you because every other artist skill is built on top of them. So when you finally understand form or like perspective or values or anatomy, it doesn't just help you fix one drawing, it upgrades everything you do from now on. And obviously there's fun ways to practice it too. Maybe have a look at the video that I posted last week about the 6-week drawing bootcamp with a bunch of exercises every week focused on leveling up those fundamentals and unlocking your potential. So go find that knowledge gap. Take a drawing that isn't working out really for you and ask yourself why. And keep asking until you hit something structural, or ask other people on like Discord and stuff like that. And then whatever you land on, well, that's what you should study next, properly. Not by copying someone's result, but by studying the theory behind that fundamental. Now, obviously that's often the part that's the hardest to fix alone, right? Because to fix a fundamental, you have to know what you're missing, and then to find the right thing to study in the right order at the right time. Now, some people might be able to find this on their own for sure. I have a ton of free content on this channel, but if you are looking for something a little bit more, something that's more guided, well, that's the whole reason I built my art program the way that I did. So Art School for Digital Artists is a complete art education. So the structure starts at absolute zero and ramps up all the way to professional level work across 67 weeks with every class you need along the way, over 30 of them in the right order. It's built as an alternative to traditional art schools at a tiny fraction of the price. You get lifetime access, all future updates for free, and a private Discord full of students working through the same stuff you are. And we just passed the 33,000 students milestone, which is crazy. So to celebrate, the program is 33% off until the end of the month. So check the link down in the video description for all the deets. And now, with my shameless plug over, let's look at the final problem that's blocking you from improving. Number 4 is how often you do it, or rather, how not often you do it. This is another one that I see all the time. Like you'll get inspired one day and then over the weekend you'll draw for 60 hours. Got so much practice in, feels good, right? But then life happens and you don't touch drawing for weeks. But then at some point, like the guilt starts to kick in. Let's do another big session to catch up. And then nothing again after that. And if you added up the hours, it looks like decent practice. Which is why it's so confusing when you're not improving after all that. But you see, skill doesn't run on total hours. It runs on frequency. Your brain keeps a skill by revisiting it before it fades. So if you leave like 3 weeks between sessions, well, most of what you learned in the previous session is gone by the time you get to the next session. The fix isn't to draw more, it's to draw more often. You might also want to shrink the session until you can't talk yourself out of it, right? So 20 minutes, 10 minutes on a bad day, because the artists that pull ahead are almost never the ones that are grinding the hardest or the most hours. They're just the ones who practice frequently. So instead of your knowledge being gone from one session to the next, it just keeps on piling up and accumulating. And so you get much better, much faster. So if your art has been stuck, it's almost certainly one of those 4 reasons, those 4 problems. Probably a couple of those at once. So again, it's when you learn it. So just in time instead of just in case. Where it comes from, right? So real things that you spend time observing instead of just copying other people's drawings. What it's built on, so the fundamentals that you skip, and how often you do it, so regularly instead of in bursts. Now, obviously, none of those are like talent problems, right? And all 4 are fixable starting today. Now, that first one, like learning things just in time instead of just in case, that's the single biggest change that you can make this week. And I happen to have built a whole video around the idea and the practice system that it comes with. So it'll be right here on screen in just a second. You should click on that and watch this next. I'll see you over there. Now click the link. Do it now.